So to introduce myself, hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Grace Kerrigan, and I am a speech language pathologist here at Bluebird.
And my name is Bridget McNamara. I am an occupational therapist at Bluebird as well.
Okay, so today we are going to be talking about screen time. We have a lot of great information for you guys, but we also really want this presentation to be as interactive as possible. So please feel free to interrupt us at any time with questions. You can also put questions in the chat if you would like, and then we'll also have plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end. So I'm going to go on and share our presentation here. Bridget, are we good for seeing that? Okay, great. Alrighty, so to kind of give you guys a little overview about what we're going to be talking about today, we are going to be talking about screen time. We're going to go over the effects that screen time has in all various areas of development, I should say. We're going to give you some alternative activities to the screen and also talk about some ways to create what we call a digital diet for your kiddo. I do want to mention before we start, this is a bit of an ironic time to be giving a presentation on screen time, seeing as we have luckily been able to benefit from technology during this crazy time. When we need to isolate from others, we've been able to use technology to connect, whether it's family FaceTimes or virtual happy hours or virtual therapy. Virtual therapy has been a wonderful way for us to connect with all of your families and continue on the wonderful progress all of your kiddos are doing in a time when we can't always be together. So we'll touch a little bit more on that. And I also want to mention too that we very much know that this is a really stressful time for everyone, and that you as parents especially are wearing lots of hats right now in your home, and that's that of parent, but also therapist and teacher, to name a few, and that sometimes screens are what we do to just kind of get through the day and get things done. And so while working, talking about screen time, I want to make sure we also give ourselves some grace during this time and recognize that this is stressful. But also hopefully this presentation can serve as a way to provide some more knowledge about the effects of screen time and also provide you with some safe and therapeutic ways to use the screen and also reduce screen time. So we will get started. Okay. So again, just kind of an overview of what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to go over, first I'm going to go over a quick few statistics. I'm also going to talk about some screen time recommendations in terms of the number of hours recommended for kiddos and the amount of screen time they should be having per day. We're then going to go into some developmental implications of screen time in all areas of development. So brain development, attention span, language development, and other important skills. And the way that screen time can impede or kind of affect those areas of development. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how you can create a digital, what that is and how to do it, some strategies to making screen time safer, and also alternative activities to reduce the time spent on screens. Okay, so to start off, here are a few statistics. First, for every 30 minutes of screen time, there is a 49% increased risk of expressive speech delay. I'm going to go a little bit more into language development and the way that kind of ties into screen time use, but there's a statistic there. Another statistic is the use of mobile devices by children has increased from 5 minutes a day in 2011 to 48 minutes a day in 2017. And finally, almost 40% of children under the age of 2 use mobile devices or mobile media, such as a cell phone. Something I want to point out right off the bat is this data is taken in 2017. And while that wasn't all that long ago, technology is rapidly changing and developing. So I think it's safe to say that those numbers are probably much higher now in almost 2021 than they were in 2017. Something to keep in mind. Moving on to recommendations for screen time. So this is taken from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And this is their following recommendations. They say for children younger than 18 months, they recommend no screen time. And now, kind of talking a little bit more about the rationale behind that recommendation. When we look at our kiddos who are under 18 months of age, cognitively, they haven't developed the understanding that the images they see on a screen represent actual events or experiences in real life. So to give you an example, if a kiddo is watching a video on like an old McDonald video, under 18 months old, they are not recognizing the fact that those images they see on the screen represent a farm that they may also be able to go to in real life, or that these animals are things that they can go see. And so in reality, what really is engaging kiddos that young in the screen is not the content, but flashing lights and the changing colors and the sounds. Ages 2 to 5, it's recommended that they receive no more than 1 hour per day. And then children ages 5 to 18, it is recommended that they receive less than 2 hours a day. Something I kind of wanted to throw in there, that this also includes screen time received during school. So while we're talking more about our little friends, I think it's interesting to note that you look at our high schoolers, and I can imagine most of them are receiving much more than 2 hours per day. So something to keep in mind, these numbers as we go through the rest of our presentation. All righty. So now I'm going to go into a little bit about these areas of development and how screen time use can either impact or impede these naturally occurring developmental areas. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about the brain. So in our brain, we have these neurotransmitters, and dopamine is a really important one, and it's known as this feel-good neurotransmitter. So our body releases this neurotransmitter, it causes a feeling of pleasure, and it serves a biological function. So a great example of this is eating. When we eat, it feels good, so we eat more, and we need to eat to survive. There's this evolutionary reality to this neurotransmitter. Technology causes the same release of dopamine, and actually, because technology is designed in a way to give us this really instant and intense stimulation, it releases a lot of dopamine. However, there's really no biological function or need for technology. And so in a lot of ways, our body, from an evolutionary perspective, hasn't really adapted to receiving all that dopamine and what that kind of means for our system. So technology can often hyperstimulate the system, kind of raise that threshold for what we need, and creates almost this addictive cycle. So the more input we get, the more we crave. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. But continuing on with the brain, the way our brain grows and develops is through these things called synapses or connections. So when our brain, especially when we're young, is learning through all of these experiences, it's creating these connections that makes our brain work that much more efficiently. During the first 2 years of life, the brain triples in size. I mean, as we can all attest to, there's so much learning and growth happening early lifespan. And with our kiddos, the best way they form these connections is through play. The brain is literally a sponge for our kids when they're playing. And the research backs this up. So if you look at the numbers, if your kiddo is having an experience, let's say as an example, an app, in order for them to create a connection in their brain that's solid, they need about 400 repetitions of this experience. However, if they're doing it through play, they only need 10 to 20. So play is just so much more of an effective and efficient way for our kiddos to learn and build these strong connections in their brain. Before I move on to an attention span, I want to take a brief pause just to make sure I don't have any questions I'm missing before I carry on. All good? Okay. Feel free to interrupt if need be. So another area of development that is crucial and happens when we're young but carries us through our lifetime is our attention span. So like I kind of mentioned before, technology is designed in a way that provides this instant stimulation and gratification. And I think that's truer now than ever. I can speak from personal experience that as soon as something lags or buffers or takes time to load, I am immediately annoyed and wanting things to be at my fingertips all the time. And this form of input, this really intense and instant stimulation, is much more appealing and can become much more motivating than live human interactions, which doesn't lead to such instant gratification all of the time. And so we find that the use of technology actually reduces the capacity to sustain attention for long periods of time, especially when you move to activities that are non-technology related. So a great example of this is learning to read. Learning to read is a tough cognitive task. It requires a lot of cognitive patience and perseverance to complete and learn that task. And when our brains are so used to getting this really instant stimulation and gratification, that capacity for cognitive perseverance starts to wane. And we see a lot more challenges with these tough cognitive tasks, such as learning to read. Also touching a little bit on language development. So just a bit on language development in general. When we're young, language, that is when the most language development occurs during this critical period. And the best way to learn language is through exposure. Being exposed to language-rich environments is essential for language development in young children. And the best way to do that is through conversations between caregivers and children. That's the biggest influential contributor to vocabulary development. It teaches you social interactions and all sorts of good things. And so when there's more of a focus or an emphasis on technology, whether it's with our kiddos or with ourselves, those opportunities for language and these language-rich experiences start to decrease. And we see that when kiddos are exposed to lower language environments, this will impact their language development as they grow older. It's kind of a good rule of thumb is the more talk, the better. Okay. And finally, I just want to touch on a couple other important skills that happen early on in development that, again, much like language and attention, carry you through your lifetime and really build your ability to maintain these successful interactions with others. So some of these skills are theory of mind, which is the ability to understand that you have different thoughts than I do. That also builds on building empathy for others and things like that. Emotional regulation and play skills. So all of these skills are so crucial, and they also are best learned through meaningful social human interactions. So it may seem kind of obvious, but we learn to interact with others by interacting with others. And much like language development, when the emphasis is on technology, there are just fewer opportunities to develop these skills within these natural human interactions. And that's where we see our kiddos having challenges with developing skills such as turn taking, feeling empathy for others, problem solving, navigating challenging social situations with peers. The best way to work on those skills is through practice, and those skills just don't come around when working with a screen. Okay, so now that we know all these kind of developmental implications of screen time, I wanted to mention a couple red flags that you can look out for to kind of see, hey, is this screen time becoming a bit too much and having a negative impact? Further on in the presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about ways to help with some of these red flags, so keep that in mind. But some of these red flags that are really great to look out for are poor sleep patterns, struggles to demonstrate sustained attention, problem solving, or that stamina and perseverance for non-technology related tasks, difficulty maintaining emotional regulation or needing technology to regulate, and demonstrating extreme aggression when the screen is removed. And something that's also kind of important to note is that a lot of these skills, sustained attention, problem solving, regulation, are all skills that a lot of our kiddos at Bluebird are working really hard with right now in their therapy and at home in these areas. And so it's good to note that while these areas may be difficult in and of themselves, the use of screens really further impact that those skills. So we are now going to talk about what we can do about this. Before I pass it off to Bridget, I want to take a quick pause and just see, I'm actually going to stop sharing here, see if anyone has any questions that they wanted to throw out there before we move on. I see there might be something. Can we share this PowerPoint? Yes. We also have a handout that kind of synthesizes all of this in a way that hopefully will be helpful as well, that we will share with you all in addition. So we'll have a handout ready for you guys. Okay. Well, Bridget, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, so before we move on, are there any other questions that anybody wants to get in at this time before we talk about some strategies of what we can do about this screen time? Okay, we'll get started. Okay, so what can we do? So one of the first things we can do is create a digital diet. So this is basically thinking about how much screen time your child will be consuming throughout their day, how much screen time they'll be getting. So the first thing you can do is evaluate the current amount of screen time that your child is receiving throughout their day. Think about those recommendations that Grace reviewed earlier. Are you right on track? Does your child get more than is recommended? And are you seeing those red flags for your child? If so, maybe is it time to reduce some of that screen time? It's also really helpful to think about your own screen time. How much are you looking at a screen? And are you able to reduce some of that screen time and really model for your child some other activities that you can do that do not involve technology? You are your parents, or you are your child's biggest model. And so if you are engaged in something that is, you put down your screen and you're engaged in something else, that's going to make your child much more excited and much more willing to do those as well. And then you can make a plan of when and where you're going to allow your child to have this screen time. So think about what works for your family and set that routine and stick to it. That will make your life a little bit easier because then your child knows what to expect. Transitioning away from technology can be really tough. So if they have those clear expectations, they know what time of day and how long they get it, it can make those transitions a lot easier. It's also really important to avoid using technology as a coping strategy or to help them soothe. A lot of our kids need just a little bit of extra time to really work on those self-regulation strategies and to be able to access that self-soothing. So if you just kind of hand them that technology right when they're having a hard time, it really doesn't give them that opportunity to be able to practice those self-coping strategies. So what you can do instead is really try to make that environment around them safe, to keep their body safe and give them that extra time. So they then learn, hey, I don't need anything else. I can depend on myself to be calm and regulated. This is really helpful down the line as well if your child ends up in an environment where they don't have access to a screen. Say your phone battery dies. And so you really want to be able to teach your child in this safe environment, hey, you can do this all on your own. You don't need that screen time for that. And then another thing you can do for this digital diet is establish some tech-free times and locations. This continues on with that clear expectation, that routine, so your child knows what to expect, making it easier to transition away from that screen time and monitor that screen time. So the first one I'd like to bring up is at the dinner table. This is a great opportunity for those social interactions with you and your child, to be able to sit down and enjoy that meal. This is also, if you're able to do that with your child when they're younger, it really sets them up to be able to do that when they get older with their friends and with your family, just kind of expanding those skills as they go. It's also really important for that mindful eating. So it can help reduce that risk of obesity and weight gain as they get older because they're really thinking about what they're eating. And then for a lot of our kiddos, we have some oral motor concerns. We're still developing those oral motor skills. So if we're distracted by watching a screen, it can actually be a safety concern because it's harder to really focus on managing what's in your mouth when you're distracted by those screens. Before bedtime is also a great time to be tech-free. It can look like your child is calm and relaxed because they're sitting and super engaged in this screen time. But all that visual stimulation that's coming from the screen is actually very alerting input. It can also impact the melatonin levels in your child's body, which makes it a lot harder for them to fall asleep, almost tricking their body into thinking, hey, it's daytime, it's not time to go to bed yet. So then that can make bedtime a lot harder. And then another great time to be tech-free is in the car. As Grace was talking about before with that language development, this is a great time to kind of look around and comment on what you're seeing and really get that social interaction because you're both sitting in the same spot and you're able to see some of the same things. And then it's also by eliminating that technology in the car, you're also setting your child up to have an easier transition away from that car and then transition into that new environment. Because if you think about it, transitions are already pretty tough for a lot of our kiddos. And so if they first have to transition from a screen, which is really hard, and then they have to transition from the car or from that environment, you just doubled that challenge. So they're working twice as hard to be able to then go into this new environment. So if you're able to kind of completely eliminate that technology right before those transitions, you can really set your child up to succeed. And then to continue on the transitioning theme, like I said, transitioning for our kids in general is really tough. But when you have this technology that is set up to get into that addictive cycle, keep them engaged, and really releases that feel-good neurotransmitter, telling their brain like, hey, this feels great, keep doing it, it can be really hard to transition away from. So some ways that we can help our kids transition away from that is being consistent. So stick to that schedule. Be consistent with the amount of time that you are going to have your child watch TV. One way to do this is to use a sleep timer. So you can set that up. You tell your child when you're first starting, okay, we're going to watch 20 minutes. And then you set the sleep timer. So even if you get distracted, you're doing something else, you're engaged in the other room, it's still turning off. It's keeping that consistent expectation. You're only having that 20 minutes. Another really helpful strategy is to give your child a verbal or visual cue to let them know that transition is coming. So even just something as simple as, okay, 2 more minutes, then we're all done with the TV. That can be enough to really help that transition. Or using a visual timer, like an app that's ticking down for you, kind of giving them that auditory and that visual cue of, hey, this transition's coming, can make it a little bit easier as well. Picking those natural endpoints, such as the end of an episode or the end of a round of a game, if they're playing an app, can make it a lot easier to transition to. Just kind of makes sense that, okay, now it's over, now it's time to go, versus putting on the TV right before you're supposed to walk out the door and then stopping it. That can be really hard for a kiddo who's used to, okay, we start it and we make it all the way to the end. So kind of just setting them up to succeed by picking that natural endpoint as the time to transition away. And then having a plan for what to do after you're done with the technology. So having a preferred choice available for the next activity can be really helpful because it not only lets your child know what's coming next, but it lets them know that it's something that they really like doing. So say your child really likes Play-Doh, and we're just about done with watching our screen. So we give them that verbal cue, okay, we have 1 more minute, and then it's time for Play-Doh, and you show them the Play-Doh. Having that exciting next activity that they like to do can be really helpful to then move on to that next thing. And then just some quick tips to reduce that screen time. When you're not watching TV, turn it off. When you're not using that screen, just turn it off. Try and reduce any of that extra stimulation that you don't need, that you're not using. Even just turning your iPad screen away from the child, even when you're listening to music. This is something that we do with movement songs almost all the time. If you have the movement song playing, simply just turn that around, and then the child is then looking at you, you're the model, instead of that video. So that's decreasing that screen time that they're looking directly at the screen. If your child is super resistant to turning the screen away, as some of our kids are, one strategy that actually a parent told me about, which I think is pretty awesome. So if you guys have any great ideas, feel free to put them in the chat, and we can talk about them later too. But get a little Bluetooth speaker. This parent used, I think it was a little kitty cat or a little whale. There's some cute little ones that you can get, but had the favorite show playing through that Bluetooth speaker. So then they could kind of hide the iPad, so they weren't really looking for that sound. They were instead looking where the sound was coming from this little Bluetooth speaker. That helped reduce that visual stimulation, and then helped them kind of reset and create a new routine where they weren't watching that favorite show right before bedtime. They were first just listening to it, then they were able to transition to music, and then they were kind of able to transition away from it completely. And then one other thing, if anybody out there has those Apple products, there's a setting that's called night shift. And this takes away that blue light, reduces that blue light a lot, and then has some more of those warmer colors. This can be helpful because it can be set, so your phone or your iPad will just do it automatically at whatever designated time, and it'll do it every single day. So that can be something that'll kind of help you stick to that routine, but can also give your child that little subtle visual cue of, hey, that transition is coming. It can also be a little bit easier to transition away from, because that high contrast or that blue light stimulation has decreased. So it's a little bit less exciting as well. And then once you have figured out when your child's going to watch and engage in that screen time, the next thing to do is really to think about what they're engaging with. So using things like movement songs and yoga to get your child up and moving, instead of that sedentary screen time of just sitting and looking at a screen, are a great place to start. Think about the goal of the screen time that you're using. Are you looking for this to be educational? Or is this just kind of entertainment for the moment while I'm trying to get something done? And one of the best things you can do is co-view that screen time with your child. So that's not only thinking about like what messages are being sent through different shows or different different videos, but really being able to see what your child is super engaged in and interested in. That'll kind of give you some ideas of what you can then pull over into play. So figure out their interests and the characters that they love. Then you can kind of use toys in in person and just kind of play with those toys. Name that little block Peppa Pig, because that's their favorite. So if you're able to kind of understand what their interests are, you can then work on those social interactions by using their interests. And that brings us to educational apps. So there are so many apps out there that market themselves as educational. They say they are going to teach your child all of these different skills, and there's about 80% of these are marketed towards children. So there's so many that are like, hey, this is what we're going to teach your child, but what are they really teaching? A lot of these apps are designed to be hyper stimulating. They're designed to keep your child engaged and looking at the screen. That's kind of how they make their money. So that is how they're designed. They really pull on that addictive cycle, hyper stimulating your child so they continue to seek that stimulation. The best way for an educational app to be educational and to really be beneficial is to have you as the parent or caregiver engaging in that app with them, and then use it as more of a supplemental tool to that learning that you're doing with play. So just to give you a little example, I'm going to show you two different apps that are both focusing on letter formation. And I kind of want you to just look at them and see, just pay attention to that, the visual stimulation, that auditory stimulation, and kind of look at the differences between the two. This first one is okay, so as you can see, so many loud noises, bright flashing lights, moving things across the screen, and we don't really talk a whole lot about the letter K. And then I want to show you this other app. This one is it's called Wet, Dry, Try, and it's part of the Handwriting Without Tears curriculum. So this is kind of just to show you that contrast.
Let's try the letter K. First, watch me write the letter. K starts in the starting corner. Go to the other corner at the top. Karate kick to the middle. Little line slides down. Now, wet the letter with a sponge.
All right, so as you can see, there's a lot less visual effects with this one. And what I really like about this is that it's telling you step by step what to do to form that letter. With this type of app, it's actually teaching you as the co-viewer how to teach your child this letter formation too. And it also looks like a chalkboard. So if you have this little chalkboard, which we do have at Bluebird, we use these in kindergarten programs. So there's a little chalkboard that goes right along with it. It's a lot easier to generalize that understanding and that skill set from an app like this to real life functional skill building versus the letter school app, which is really, you can see all of that visual stimulation focusing on keeping your child engaged with the screen. All right, we're gonna go over some different technology-free activities. If you are thinking, hey, I need to reduce this screen time, here's some different ideas of how you can do it. So one of the first things I like to suggest is incorporate your child into that chore that you need to get done. So say you need to wash the dishes. It can be a really great learning opportunity for your child and a great way to work on those foundational fine motor skills and gross motor skills if you give them a job. So have them be the ones to squeeze the soap bottle. So squeeze that soap onto your sponge and then you wash the dish. Or if they are able to, practice holding the plate and using the sponge and actually practice watching the dishes. This works on so many things like sustained attention and staying engaged in a functional activity. working at midline, bilateral coordination, which is something that we need to be able to cut and do all of those types of academic tasks. So you're working on so many things, but then you're also getting your chores done. If your child's not ready for that, you could also set up a parallel play activity. So you're washing the dishes and you're in your sink, and then right next to you is this big bucket of water that your child is playing in. They could have a sponge and some dishes too, or they could just be dumping and pouring and playing. But it gives you the opportunity to be working next to each other, gives more of those opportunities for that language development and that social interaction. And it keeps your child entertained while you're getting done what you need to get done. Sometimes you can't have them do the activity with you. And I can only imagine how that is right now, given all the hats like Grace was talking about that everybody's wearing right now. But some of the things you can do around your house while still decreasing that screen time is use the environment to really help promote that independent play. So I know independent play is something that a lot of our kids struggle with, but you can use your environment to really set them up for success. One of the things I love to suggest to parents is to pull all the cushions off the couch and build a little fort. This will give them kind of a physical barrier of like, hey, stay in this little area. And then you can give them something like a sensory bag, which keeps that mess contained, and a flashlight. And then they are inside there, super excited, and they're given that physical barrier to kind of stay where they are. That can sustain that attention for a little bit longer. If your child loves books, again, that fort with a flashlight and some books can keep them super entertained while you're doing something that you need to get done. And with water exploration, I feel like so many of our kids love to play with water, but it can be a huge mess. So one of the things you can do is just get a big pot of water, a big bucket of water, and put it in the bathtub. Then they can splash, they can get messy, but it's pretty contained. It's in one spot, and obviously still needs some supervision, but you can supervise from a little bit farther away and kind of do what you're doing while they're doing what they're doing. Here are just some toys that provide that visual stimulation, but in a more functional way. And they're providing that fine motor challenge as well. So you're working on a couple different areas of development. The marble maze is one of my favorites and one of our kids' favorites as well. This one might need a little bit more help depending on where your child is fine motor wise. They might need a little bit more help to actually build the maze, but you can really set them up for a play routine. So once you have built all this big tower together, it's really easy for them to engage in that simple cause and effect play of placing the marble in, watching it go down, and starting it again. So that can be super engaging and keep them engaged, allowing you some time to get done what you need to get done. The water wow is another one of my favorites. It's great to work on our grass pattern for kids who are writing letters down to kids who are working on that functional scribble. Because the water wow has the water inside the pen, it's not super messy. So it's easy to travel. You can bring it with you. And it's engaging for our kids because once the water goes on the page, it changes the color. So it's a great way to provide that visual stimulation, but you're still working on some really functional activities. And then here are just some general activities that are working on that global development. These are some that Grace and I put together that are really working on that language development, but there's also that motor piece as well. I know a lot of you are doing a lot of these things already, but we just kind of wanted to put these in there to give you some more ideas if you're looking for them.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in one last time before we open this up for discussions and questions to talk a little bit more about virtual therapy. I touched on this a little bit at the beginning of the presentation, but wanted to touch on it again. So we have been so excited to get to do virtual therapy with all of you. The progress has been remarkable. It's been very cool to watch you all work with your kiddos. But obviously it does increase the amount of screen time. And so I wanted to talk about some ways that we can continue to let this virtual therapy be so effective and continue to work on this progress that we have seen with all of your kiddos, while being considerate of the screen time if that's something you're concerned about. So one way to reduce some of the direct screen time, and this may be something a lot of your therapists are doing already, so you may be familiar with this, is having portions of your session or all of your session be using more of a parent coaching model. So you can kind of place the iPad or the computer a little bit off, giving your therapist a nice view of the room, and then engaging in an activity, the two of you, and your therapist is there more as a support, to kind of coach you guys through those more challenging moments, give little tidbits of advice. And these activities mirror more what the sessions look like when they're in the clinic. So these activities can be cooking a meal together, and just have your therapist on the counter, or playing on the rug with cars or, baby dolls or blocks, doing an art craft together. So that's some opportunities for all of these skills to develop in a really natural and play-based setting. Another thing I wanted to mention is that we have been putting together quarantine kits. So all of the disciplines have been contributing to these kits. Some of you may have already picked yours up. If not, they're all available for you at Bluebird. But these are a bag of resources from all of the disciplines that include, there's science experiment recipes, there's craft templates, there's games, there's different activities. There's also a bunch of manipulables in there like Play-Doh and bubbles and crayons and pom-poms. And so these are to offer opportunities to work on some of these skills off the screen. Oh, visuals also, Sarah's saying. Lots of visuals. We have first thens and star charts, and there's a lot of stuff. Anyway, so these are opportunities for you to use these things in sessions, but also, like Bridget mentioned, if you have your own work to get done and you need your kiddo engaged in something, this can be something you set them up with. I'm seeing a question, can we pick these up at our next sessions? Yes, so these are being created every day and are ready for pickup. I think I'm creating them at West Loop, so perhaps we can find a little more information for our North Center families on like who they should contact for those. But if you just contact your therapist team, they can set you up and make sure. Oh, perfect. West Loop family. Yeah, so just let us know, call the front desk. They have them ready, and we just have them in a big tote bag for families ready to go. So those are really great options for both your virtual therapy and for outside of therapy. And finally, I wanted to give a little plug to our Bluebird YouTube channel and website. So the last few months, all of your Bluebird therapists have been building up a library of resources to offer your child screen time opportunities that are going to be more, we can ensure that they're safe and appropriate. And so some of these, there's going to be a video up there of me reading a couple books, favorite Bluebird books. There's a video coming out of all of your favorite therapists dancing to silly songs. We have therapists singing beautifully to some of the favorite songs. And so these are really great opportunities that if your kiddo, you need to get some stuff done, really be helpful if they were engaged. You could have them watch this instead. And then the video, it's people they know, and it's songs and books they know. And that way you can really be sure that the screens and the content they're watching are safe and appropriate. So that's just a little bit about some of the resources we have at Bluebird. That is all we had. So we can just open it up to questions. I see some coming in. Does virtual therapy count as screen time in terms of the negative effects noted? What about FaceTime with family? Does this all count against the suggested screen time hours, or is it considered a different bucket? That's a really, really good question. Bridget, do you want to take that away, or would you like me to start?
I can definitely. And then if you have anything to add, please
Yeah.
do. So technically it is all in that same bucket of that recommended time. But being able to interact is very different than just having your child stare at a screen. So while it may be in that visual stimulation category. So when it comes to that like length of time, yes, it falls into that. But if you're going to be doing screen time, that is the best type to do. You're working on all of those different interactions, and it's people they know, kind of like Grace was talking about with the virtual therapy and with the YouTube Bluebird resources. It's safe content. It's working on those interactions. So it's
I'm sorry, Bridget.
No, go ahead.
And just also to kind of note, so like, yes, those effects of like the blue light before bed are going to have the same effects, but having, being on a FaceTime where the person is talking back to you, or virtual therapy, when the therapist is speaking back to you and working with your child in the way that they need, that's going to be a much different ballgame. While yes, these kind of physical impacts of the screen are still going to exist, that there are, like Bridget said, you're working on language development. It's not this sedentary screen time. You're working on that back and forth interaction. It's a better version of screen time, if that makes sense, but hopefully that answers it. How do you delay the onset of screen time? I think I need a little more clarification on that one. Thank you. E.g. after Bluebird, at lunch, or if the child continuously asks for it. So kind of trying to monitor that amount and working on that schedule. Bridget, I would love for you to take that to start, just because I feel like that plays a little bit more into that timing and easing into that digital diet. I think it's definitely going to be a slow transition, I will say.
Yeah.
So just to follow up on that, like we've tried visuals of, like saying, okay, after lunch you get screen, this is really hard to delay it past that because I think that then that's the only focus. It's like, oh, when can I watch a show? When can I watch a show? And so like it's helpful to know how to get them off of it, but delaying the onset of it so it's later in the day.
Yeah, so where my brain instantly goes is come up with some other ideas of things that you want them to do and kind of show them that plan. So if it's not like, I think using after lunch is a great start. So that's giving them a concrete, okay, this is something that we're doing. And then after that's done, that's when screen time is. If you want to delay that, then use that same visual you have. So you have after lunch, we have screen time. And then once that's successful, we do after lunch, we do a craft, and then we have screen time. Or we do water play, and then we have screen time. So kind of adding in like one, maybe a short activity first, and then kind of work from there. So almost step by step, push it back, and then kind of structure your day that way.
I'm seeing another question. So will we be going to lockdown for sure and only have in-home therapy? I'm thinking that may be in reference to the quarantine kits I mentioned. So there has been, we're following the Chicago rules, and so far there has not been a declaration for that. So that is not currently the plan. Though reasoning for those quarantine kits is when a pod does kind of go down and have to quarantine for a little while. We created those kits so parents and you guys could have those resources. And also some of our kiddos are still receiving virtual therapy in addition to, a lot of our kiddos are still receiving virtual therapy in addition to their in-clinic services. And so these are all just to help support you guys in those times. And then also, even if just they're done with their school day and you need them to be focused on something, these are some opportunities that, bring some of the clinic home with them. Sarah asked if we have resources for movement songs and any favorites. Shake Your Sillies Out comes to mind.
Definitely one of my favorites. Freeze Dance is definitely in there. If you just Google movement songs, a lot of them come up. One of the things to really look for is if you can figure out some movements that go along with them and then you can learn them. just kind of looking through them and seeing what fast beats are fun and that we like to listen to.
Amanda also suggested head, shoulders, knees, and toes, which is always a good one. There's always also really fun ones like around different times of year. So like there's really funny ones for Halloween. We were just listening to a lot at school, and winter themed ones. So those are fun as well.
Any other questions?
And like, I think Sarah mentioned it in the chat, if someone missed it, we will be sharing the recording of this presentation. So if you came in late, we will have, we have a couple other questions coming in too. But we will have this for you all. And we also have a handout that kind of synthesizes a lot of this information. Okay, let's see. How can we encourage FaceTime with family? Meaning like in-person FaceTime? I believe.
Yeah, like when our when my son FaceTimes with like grandparents, especially because we can't see family as much right now, it's really difficult to have him engage in phone calls when it's a non-preferred task and he's doing something that is a preferred task, whether it's screen time or not. And so getting him to like engage in that FaceTime phone call with my father or his uncle or whatever it may be, or the person it may be, it's like difficult. And so we've been working on WH questions a lot. And he will often recycle the same WH questions which is great. But like, I'm just wondering about like, are there like strategies and tactics I can encourage him to use to meet that target of like being able to interact socially and clearly independently?
That's a really good question. So one suggestion I have that comes to mind is, especially if he's engaged in activity that isn't screen time. So Bridget used the example of Play-Doh, but let's say, whatever he's into, if he's got some action figures he's really into, or, building with blocks, that if possible, if the family member on the other side of the FaceTime can also have that activity. So like, let's say they have a marker and a paper and they're both coloring. So then it's not just, sometimes it's hard for kiddos to sustain that attention when it's just a conversation and it's a little bit more abstract. But if both of you are engaged in like an activity that they can then talk about, that's a lot easier for kiddos to map on, especially if they're having trouble kind of, like you said, coming up with questions, or they kind of keep going back to their routine ones. It's not very interesting to them. Then that way there's kind of that joint experience that you can be doing as well. And then when they're not really feeling talking, they're still like seeing their grandpa and drawing a picture together.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic idea, especially because my dad doesn't always know how to talk back.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, we've all had our awkward Zoom calls, so it happens. But I think that will, kind of always building on that like natural interaction and like how, we would interact with little kiddos. I don't usually expect kids to just sit there and talk with me my whole session. I have to bring in more things to make me interesting. So I would kind of use that same rule of thumb. Sorry, Bridget, go ahead.
Sorry, just one quick little thing. Going off of that, also, if it's kind of hard for your child to engage with that, think about the environment that they're in. So if you're able to get them into maybe a smaller room, or even build that fort and you guys go in there when you're doing your Zoom call, just kind of thinking about that environment that they're into and limiting those like exciting distractors around them, so that grandpa on the screen is the most exciting thing in the room.
Okay, so we have another really good question. For a child that uses AAC, can you give an example of how we model when screen time is all done? My child gets very upset when his screen time is over, and he only gets about an hour and a half a day. So I'm guessing it's a communication issue. I think that's a really great guess. I think there's a lot of reasons that screen time is tough to transition away from. Communication breakdowns is a big one. Also, I think, like Bridget said, that hyperstimulation leading to, it makes it hard to regulate once it's taken away. But from a communication perspective, especially with AAC users, and actually this works for anybody, AAC or not, I think the use of visuals is going to be your biggest friend. So when Bridget was mentioning before, kind of structuring your day in a schedule so kiddos know when screen time is coming and when it's ending. And Amanda's reminding me, AAC is our alternative augmentative communication. So our kiddos that use PECs or pictures to communicate, or our kiddos that use like a speech generating device or a talker, we like to call it. So any form of communication like that. But anyway, so when we use these visuals, it's really going to help our kiddos who have these difficulties with receptive language or who have difficulty expressing their wants and ideas. It'll be much easier for them to kind of understand the expectation and be prepared for when that's coming. Your therapist can be really great resources helping you to create those visuals if that's something that would be helpful for you. Creating schedules that, okay, every day when we come home, and this is taped to the refrigerator, we eat lunch. Okay, the next box, there's a screen. Okay, the next box is choice time. And then we read a book, and then we watch the screen, and then it's dinner. And you have that mapped out. Or even just using a first then visual, which is in your quarantine kit. And having that be first screen, then book, or first lunch and then screen. That would be a really helpful way to make sure that the communication breakdown is a little bit less, and that the expectation is really clear. And then just to kind of go off of that, just in terms of modeling with AAC, you can always model that output on if it's a speech generating device, you can always just model that yourself. So, okay, in 1 minute, we are all done. And then clicking that on the talker, or if it's PECs, showing the picture of PECs. But visual, I think is usually the biggest help. Bridget, did you have anything you want to add to that?
Sarah also put in here, using a timer is also helpful. So the timer is telling them that screen time is over or when it can start, rather than you being the bad guy. So again, with those visuals, but also using that timer. So in the moment, it's telling you like, hey, it's time.
Mm-hmm. And there's a bunch of apps for that. And also just like a little kitchen timer is great as well. Timers are rad. Yes, they are. Okay, another question, really great one. How to calm down after watching screen time? Bridget, I think this seems like a you question.
There's a lot of different ways to kind of approach this question, and probably a lot of different things that you've tried. I would say one of the things is start to think about how your child is regulation status wise before they engage in that screen time. So make sure they're pretty regulated before you start watching that screen time. And if you notice that there is a significant change after screen time where your child's having just such a hard time regulating after they're done, I might suggest cutting down that screen time and decreasing it. Another thing you can do is some of those techniques that I talked about earlier, where you have something that they really enjoy, that they find really calming. If your child really loves water play or something like that, having that as like set up as the next thing that they're going to do, so they have something to look forward to after transitioning away from that screen time. Yeah, of course. I would also say to that, definitely talk to your occupational therapist about your kiddo. They could likely have some very individualized ideas for your child, those things that really help them calm down, that they have those regulation strategies that work specifically for your child. If you're struggling with that and these general techniques aren't really helping right off the bat.
This is super helpful. It feels like such a 180 when I have said no screens for so long and now we need them. I know that's why I kind of said that this presentation comes at a bit of an ironic time, but I think also just recognizing the, kind of effects it does have. I know there was a couple facts in here when we were researching for this presentation that were really eye-opening for me. And, it's knowledge is power, and having alternative activities in our toolkit is always really helpful. What are the helpful packs called again? We have quarantine kits. Whoever thought we'd be doing that, but here we are. Yeah, so those are available at Bluebird. And if you have anything specific for your kiddo, like Bridget mentioned, that you think, oh my gosh, a specific screen time visual would be really helpful to have at home, talk to your therapist team and they can work on putting those in those kits. So you guys have all of that at your disposal. Yes. Oh, there are craft boxes on Amazon too. That's a really great tip. That could be really fun, especially over these holiday times as well. That could be a FaceTime activity. This video going to be available on the BBD website. Sarah, I'm going to defer to you on that one, where we're sharing this, because I am not totally sure. Yes, it will be. And we will also make sure that that handout I mentioned is available as well, just if you need a quick resource to refer back to.
Yeah, and we want to thank you guys all for coming and listening to our screen time. We're so happy that we had so many people come out, and thank you for all of your great questions. We have a couple more minutes if you guys want to get in any last minute questions.
Seems like maybe it's wrapping up. So again, my name is Grace Kerrigan, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions, and also your specific therapist. They are all fabulous resources when it comes to your child's more individualized needs. But if you think of any questions and you'd like to shoot us an email, we'd be happy to chat with you further. Thank you all so much for coming. It was so wonderful chatting with everybody. And have a great night.